Do you think Krampus is just a festive folk tale? A harmless Alpine tradition of a horned devil who punishes naughty children at Christmas? What if I told you the legend of Krampus isn't folklore at all, but rather a desperate attempt to explain something far more ancient and sinister? A warning disguised as tradition to help us forget what we're not supposed to remember? The evidence has been there all along, hidden in plain sight, scattered across centuries, buried in obscure historical records, and deliberately suppressed by authorities who decided the truth was too dangerous for public knowledge. Tonight, we uncover what they don't want you to know about the entity we call Krampus. December 5th has long been celebrated as Krampusnacht across Alpine regions, a night when men dress as horned beasts and terrorize villages, a performance, we're told, entertainment. But ask yourself, why would isolated mountain communities, struggling to survive harsh winters, dedicate precious resources to elaborate costumes and ceremonies honoring a demonic entity? What were they really trying to appease? In 1283, the first documented case of what we now recognize as a Krampus incident occurred in the remote village of Feldkirch, nestled deep in what is now Austria. The town records, kept by a monk named Brother Matthias, describe something far more disturbing than costumed revelry. The parchment, damaged by fire and time, contains a passage that historians have consistently mistranslated or ignored entirely. 7 children gone. The darkness came when the sun was highest, yet no light reached us. Hooves upon the snow left no marks. The parents weep but do not speak of it. The bishop forbids this record. The official explanation, a wolf attack. But wolves don't come at midday. Wolves leave tracks, and wolves don't cause darkness to fall in the middle of the day. For centuries, similar incidents repeated throughout the Alpine region, children vanishing, strange sounds in the night, cloven footprints that started and stopped impossibly. Communities began developing rituals, not to celebrate a folk character, but to protect themselves from something they couldn't comprehend. The horned masks weren't costumes. They were a desperate attempt to confuse whatever was hunting them by making everyone look like the hunter. By the 1600s, the Catholic Church had taken notice. A Vatican expedition led by Cardinal Friedrich Baldung traveled to the region under the pretense of documenting local customs. What they actually compiled was evidence of something unnatural moving through these isolated communities. Their findings were sealed in the Vatican's secret archives under order of Pope Innocent X in 1647. The file designation: Albtraum Entität, nightmare entity. A single page from Baldung's report escaped destruction. It reads, "It waits for the darkest days. It feeds not on flesh, but on fear and innocence. Those taken are not its victims, but its messengers. We cannot destroy it. We can only make the people forget what they've seen by giving them a legend to replace their memories." And thus, the church began its campaign of obfuscation. Local priests were instructed to formalize the Krampus tradition, to transform encounters with the unexplainable into folklore. What had been terror became tradition. What had been warning became winter festival. It worked. For generations, the incident subsided, or at least became obscured behind the veil of new customs. The entity, whatever it was, seemed to retreat as people ceased to acknowledge its reality. Children were taught to fear a fictional monster so they wouldn't notice the real one walking among them. But in the winter of 1892, something changed. Following a particularly harsh autumn across the Alps, reports of unusual occurrences surged again. Multiple villages in the Tyrol region experienced what locals described as the long night, a period of near total darkness lasting almost 38 hours despite clear skies. When the sun finally returned, 23 people had vanished without a trace. Not just children this time, adults too. Dr. Ernst Hoffmann, a folklorist from Vienna, traveled to investigate. His letters home betrayed growing unease as he collected testimonies. The descriptions do not align with traditional Krampus folklore. Witnesses speak of a smell like burning metal. Several mentioned a sound like many voices speaking at once. Most disturbing, those who saw it directly claim it wore faces they recognized, people who had died years before. Hoffmann never published his findings. 3 weeks into his investigation, his journal entries abruptly ceased. The final entry, dated January 17, 1893, contains just 3 words: "It sees me." His body was found in spring when the snows melted, sitting upright against a tree, eyes open, with no signs of injury or struggle. The official cause of death, exposure to cold, yet his coat was unbuttoned, his gloves neatly folded beside him. No one freezes to death with such composure. Austrian authorities confiscated his research. It has never been made public. The pattern continued into the modern era. During the turmoil of World War I, as the old empires collapsed, the entity seemed to grow bolder. Alpine soldiers reported hearing strange sounds echoing through mountain passes, sounds that some described as the crying of children mixed with the ringing of bells. Units who investigated these sounds often failed to return. A remarkable first-hand account comes from Lieutenant Joseph Meyer of the Austrian 3rd Mountain Brigade. In December 1916, his patrol sought shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut during a blizzard. In his field report, later classified by the Imperial Army, he wrote, "We were 7 when we entered. By morning, we were 4. No one heard anything in the night. No footprints led from the hut, yet Hoffman, Gruber, and Steiner were gone. Their packs remained, their weapons remained, even their boots remained, placed neatly by their empty bedrolls." Most strange was Muller's reaction. He seemed unsurprised and told us simply, "Krampus collects what belongs to him." We placed him under arrest for suspected involvement, but he only laughed. By nightfall, Muller too was gone. Though we watched him every moment, the door never opened. After World War II, as Europe rebuilt, many Alpine communities deliberately downplayed their Krampus traditions, hoping modernization would finally sever their connection to whatever haunted them. For decades it seemed to work. Reports became sporadic, isolated, easily dismissed. Then came the Krampus renaissance of the early 2000s. What began as nostalgic revival of old customs quickly became commercialized. Krampus-themed products appeared on shelves, Hollywood made movies, the internet spread images of the horned entity across the globe. Suddenly, what had been contained in remote Alpine valleys for centuries had worldwide recognition. And something noticed. December 2009. Schladming, Austria. The annual Krampuslauf parade drew record crowds. Among the performers was a particularly elaborate Krampus costume that no one in the organizing committee had registered. Witnesses described it as too authentic, with movements that seemed impossible for someone in a suit. 4 spectators who encountered this figure up close reported feeling a sudden overwhelming cold and the smell of metal and rot. The following morning, a local family discovered their 2 children missing from their beds. The police found no signs of forced entry. The only clue, a fine black powder like soot on the windowsill. Analysis proved inconclusive. The children were never found. Similar incidents followed wherever Krampus celebrations grew in popularity. Styria, 2011, Bavaria, 2013. Slovenia, 2015, always the same pattern. Elaborate celebrations followed by unexplained disappearances. Always the same powder left behind, always the same official silence afterward. Researchers brave enough to investigate these cases have themselves become part of the pattern. Journalist Maria Huber, who had been compiling evidence for a documentary on modern Krampus disappearances, vanished from her Munich apartment in November 2017. Her research notes were found scattered across her floor, many pages covered in the same black residue. Her final recorded interview with an elderly Alpine resident identified only as Klaus contained a statement that authorities have tried repeatedly to scrub from the internet. We were never supposed to talk about it, never supposed to make it famous. The costumes, the parades, those were to help us forget the real thing, not to honor it. Now you've all invited it into your homes with your movies and decorations. It has many names, many faces. Krampus is just the mask we gave it so we could sleep at night. Klaus himself was found dead 3 days after the interview, apparently from heart failure. The coroner noted unusual retinal damage, as if he had stared at something impossibly bright. His last words to his daughter, "It's coming back with me. Lock the doors." The scientific community remains skeptical, attributing these events to elaborate hoaxes, mental illness, or criminal activity. But those explanations fail to account for the consistency of reports across centuries or the black residue that defies chemical analysis. Authorities have dismissed it as ordinary soot, yet samples have shown unusual properties, seeming to move under microscopic observation and degrading any organic material it contacts. Perhaps most disturbing is the accelerating frequency of incidents. What once occurred generations apart now happens yearly. The entity seems to be gaining strength from increased attention, feeding on our fascination just as it once fed on fear. In December 2020, during pandemic lockdowns, Krampus celebrations were largely canceled across Europe. Yet police departments in 7 countries reported a surge in missing persons cases between December 5th and 6th. In each case, investigators found traces of black powder and no signs of forced entry. In each case, security cameras failed at the exact moment of disappearance. In each case, the investigations were quietly closed within weeks. A leaked internal memo from Interpol, dated January 2021, instructed law enforcement agencies to classify all such disappearances as standard missing persons cases regardless of circumstances. The document referenced preventing public panic and absence of conventional explanations. The final directive was clear. No mention of folklore connections in official reports. Why such coordinated suppression? What do they know that we don't? The answer may lie in the patterns too consistent to ignore. The entity we call Krampus doesn't just take, it replaces. Survivors of encounters often report seeing someone familiar acting strangely beforehand, a neighbor, a colleague, even a family member who seemed not quite right, eyes too dark, movements too stiff, voice too hollow. Consider the testimony of Hannah Borger, a schoolteacher from Innsbruck who narrowly escaped what she believes was an encounter in 2018. 3 weeks before the traditional Krampusnacht celebrations, she noticed her husband Thomas behaving oddly. He stopped eating. He would stand at the window at night, just watching the street. He smelled like metal. When I asked what was wrong, he always said the same thing. The children have been so good this year. We don't have children. Hannah fled to her sister's home after finding Thomas standing over her bed one night, silently watching her sleep. When police checked their apartment, Thomas was gone. In his place, a pile of black dust. Authorities listed him as missing, despite Hannah's insistence that whatever came back wasn't Thomas anymore. Similar accounts stretch back centuries, people returning from the forests, or changed, standing too still, speaking too rarely before others begin to vanish around them. These returned ones are described as hollow, cold to the touch, with eyes that reflect nothing. They often disappear themselves once their purpose is fulfilled. Are they messengers, scouts, or something else entirely? The timing cannot be coincidental. The winter solstice, the darkest time of year, has always been when the boundary between our world and others grows thin. Ancient cultures worldwide recognized this period as dangerous, establishing rituals and traditions to ward off entities that could slip through in the darkness. The Krampus tradition may be just one of many such protective measures, disguised as celebration. But our modern world has forgotten the real purpose of these traditions. We've commercialized them, trivialized them, turned warnings into entertainment. And in doing so, we may have disabled our ancestors' carefully constructed defenses. The evidence suggests we're dealing with something that exists in the spaces between perception, an entity that can move between physical and non-physical states, that feeds on attention as much as fear. The more we acknowledge it, the stronger it becomes. Yet ignoring it completely leaves us vulnerable to its approach. This creates an impossible dilemma. To warn is to empower it. To remain silent is to enable it. Which brings us to now. To you watching this. You might be thinking this is just an elaborate story, dark entertainment for a winter's night. That would be the comfortable assumption, the safe one. But consider the black residue found at multiple disappearance sites. Analysis shows it contains carbon unlike any naturally occurring form, carbon that appears to be in a quantum state of both existence and non-existence simultaneously. Theoretical physicists who've examined samples describe it as matter returning from somewhere else, or reality in the process of reasserting itself. Consider the electronic disruptions that accompany sightings, cameras failing, phones dying, even pacemakers malfunctioning. These aren't random glitches, but evidence of something that distorts our technological perception just as it distorts our visual perception. Consider that since I began researching this topic 6 months ago, 3 of my sources have ceased all communication. My hard drives have failed repeatedly. My home security system captures strange shadows moving in empty rooms. And each morning, I find a fine black powder on my windowsill that I cannot wash away. The entity we call Krampus may be awakening to unprecedented strength. Our global fascination has broken the containment our ancestors carefully maintained for centuries. What was once limited to remote Alpine valleys now has potential reach wherever its image is shared, its story told, its name spoken. That includes here, now. Through the screen you're watching, some of you might have noticed something odd while watching this video. A shadow at the corner of your vision, a faint smell like burning metal, a sound just below the threshold of hearing. If so, it means it's already noticed you too. The winter solstice approaches. The darkest days are coming. And this year, Krampus has a worldwide audience. Watch for the signs. Unexplained cold spots in your home, black powder on surfaces that returns no matter how often you clean it, electronic devices activating by themselves, dreams of hooves on rooftops, the subtle wrongness in familiar faces, pupils too large, smiles too fixed, movements too deliberate. If you experience these, do not investigate alone. Do not attempt to document or record what you see. It only gives it strength. Instead, revive the original protective purpose of the Krampus tradition. Acknowledge the danger without inviting it closer. The Alpine villagers who survived centuries of encounters left us clues in their customs. Bells to warn of its approach, masks to confuse its perception, fire to hold back the darkness it brings. These weren't decorative elements, but practical tools we might need again. Authorities won't acknowledge the pattern, scientists can't explain the evidence, the media won't connect the disappearances. But now you know what to watch for. Now you understand what the festivities were really meant to contain. I've taken a risk by compiling this information. By sharing it with you, I've likely drawn its attention more fully to myself. But someone needed to warn you before this holiday season brings another surge of unexplained vanishings. If you're seeing this and I've gone silent afterward, you'll understand why. The black powder is on my desk as I record this. The temperature in my room drops by the hour. My cameras catch glimpses of something tall in the hallway, something that shouldn't be able to fit through my doors. I don't expect help to arrive in time, but perhaps my warning will help you recognize the signs before it's too late. Perhaps you'll remember to hang bells that can announce its approach. Perhaps you'll know to keep lights burning on the longest nights, or perhaps you'll dismiss this as elaborate fiction, a creepy story crafted for views and engagement. That would be safer for me. The entity seems to lose interest in those who cease to perceive it as real. But ask yourself, why has every culture created monsters that take children in the night? Why do we share the same primal fears across continents and centuries? What collective memory are we preserving through our legends? The truth about Krampus isn't found in cheerful holiday horror films or commercial decorations. It's written in village records where children vanished on the longest nights. It's preserved in the inexplicable fear people feel when they see certain Krampus masks, the ones carved to actual specifications rather than cartoonish exaggerations. It's encoded in the original warnings. Be good. Stay inside. Don't attract its attention. If you've watched this far, you're already involved. You've opened yourself to awareness, and awareness opens doors that swing both ways. It can see those who see it. But knowledge is protection of a sort. Now you understand why Alpine villages ring bells through the night on December 5th, not to celebrate, but to warn when something approaches. Why they keep their children close, fires burning bright, and eyes averted from shadows. The real Krampus tradition isn't about punishment for misbehavior. It's about surviving the thing that waits in mountain passes, and now, perhaps in the darkest corners of modern homes worldwide. Remember this when you hear unexplained sounds this winter. When shadows move against the light's logic, when someone familiar seems suddenly hollow behind their eyes. Remember this when you find black powder on your windowsill. If you've experienced anything like what I've described, leave a comment with the phrase, "The bells warn us." Others who know will understand. But be careful. Acknowledging it publicly may draw its attention more fully toward you. Yet remaining silent leaves others vulnerable. This is the impossible choice we face, to speak and strengthen it, or to stay silent and allow it to hunt unopposed. The darkest days approach. The entity we call Krampus stirs with renewed hunger after centuries of constraint. Our fascination has become its invitation, our attention, its sustenance. And now, your attention is here, with this story, with these warnings. Can you feel the temperature dropping as you watch? That's not imagination. That's recognition. It knows you now. Lock your doors tonight. Keep lights burning. Watch the shadows carefully. And if you hear bells in the darkness, understand what our ancestors understood. They're not announcing celebration. They're warning you to run.